remember the exact moment I realized I had become invisible. Not physically, though sometimes I wondered if that might hurt less, but socially, economically, spiritually invisible. It was at Sarah's engagement party, the one where champagne, flutes caught the light like tiny prisons, and everyone's laughter seemed to echo just a little too loudly, as if trying to drown out something uncomfortable. I stood by the marble kitchen island, watching condensation form on my untouched glass of sparkling water, because even the $20 champagne felt like a luxury I couldn't justify. "Did you see her shoes?" The whisper floated over from the cluster of women near the French doors. Designer heels clicked against hardwood like tiny hammers. "Those are definitely from Target. And that dress, I swear I saw it at the thrift store downtown." I didn't need to look to know they were talking about me. My cheeks burned with the familiar heat of shame, that acidic feeling that starts in your stomach and crawls up your throat, like poison ivy. I smoothed down my black dress, the one I'd worn to 3 weddings, 2 baby showers, and countless networking events because it was the only thing in my closet that didn't scream, struggling artist. The fabric was soft cotton, not silk. The cut was classic, not trendy. It was honest, which apparently made it criminal. The worst part wasn't the judgment. It was the way conversations died when I approached, like I carried some contagious disease, called financial instability. Old friends suddenly remembered they needed to check their phones. New acquaintances found reasons to drift toward more promising networking opportunities. I had become the human equivalent of an awkward silence. Maybe she should have stayed home, another voice suggested, barely concealed behind a sip of champagne. It's embarrassing, really, coming to events like this when you clearly can't afford to keep up. Keep up. As if life was a race where your worth was measured by the price tag on your accessories. As if the hours I spent hunched over my laptop, building something they couldn't see, didn't count because it hadn't yet translated into the kind of currency they respected. As if my dreams were somehow less valid because they came wrapped in second-hand clothes and homemade lunches. I excused myself to the bathroom, not because I needed to use it, but because I needed a moment to breathe without someone analyzing my financial status through my appearance. The mirror reflected back a woman who looked tired, yes, but not defeated. Not yet. My eyes still held something they couldn't take away. Something that burned quietly in the spaces between their whispered cruelties. The bathroom was silent, except for the distant sound of the party continuing without me. I pressed my palms against the cool marble countertop and stared at my reflection. "They don't know," I whispered to the woman in the mirror. "They don't know what you're building." But even as I said it, doubt crept in like cold air through a cracked window. What if they were right? What if I was delusional, chasing fantasies while everyone else lived in the real world of steady paychecks and predictable futures? What if my dreams were just elaborate ways of avoiding the truth that I simply wasn't good enough? I walked back, into the party with my chin up. But something had shifted. I could feel the weight of their assumptions pressing down on my shoulders like a heavy coat. Every conversation felt like a performance. Every laugh like a test I was failing. By the time I made my excuses and left early, I felt like I was drowning in the space between who I was and who they needed me to be to matter. The drive home was silent, except for the sound of my own breathing and the whisper of tires on asphalt. In the darkness, their words echoed louder than they had in the bright party lights. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was fooling myself. Every morning began the same way. The jarring buzz of my phone alarm at 5:30 a.m., followed by the immediate weight of everything I was carrying. The apartment was quiet in those pre-dawn hours, just me and the blue glow of my laptop screen, and the endless stream of code that had become both my salvation and my prison. Coffee brewed in a second-hand machine that gurgled like it was drowning, and I wrapped my fingers around the warm mug like it was the only solid thing in a world that seemed determined to prove I didn't belong. The work was invisible, which made it perfect for someone like me. someone who had learned to exist in the spaces between other people's expectations. While they slept in their Egyptian cotton sheets and woke up to check their investment portfolios, I was building something they couldn't see, couldn't touch, couldn't dismiss with a glance at my shoes or my handbag or my car that had been new when I was still in high school. Lines of code flowed across my screen like digital poetry, each function a small act of rebellion against everyone who had written me off. I was creating something that would scale, something that would grow while they were busy measuring each other's worth in surface-level symbols. The algorithms I wrote at 3 a.m. would work for me while they slept. The platforms I built in Stolen hours would generate revenue while they were getting their weekly manicures. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. "Honey, your cousin Jennifer just bought a house. Maybe you should think about getting a more stable job." The message sat there like a small knife, well-intentioned but sharp. Even the people who loved me most couldn't see what I was building. To them, I was just their brilliant daughter, who had somehow lost her way, choosing uncertainty over security, dreams over sensible decisions. I typed back, "I'm working on something big. Trust me." But even as I sent it, I wondered if I was trying to convince her or myself. The isolation was the hardest part. Success, when it comes slowly and quietly, is the loneliest kind of victory. There were no celebrations for the small wins, the first paying customer, the first month of positive cash flow, the first time my bank account didn't make me wince when I checked it. These victories happened in silence, witnessed only by the glow of my laptop screen and the empty coffee cups that accumulated like evidence of my dedication. Friends stopped calling, not out of cruelty, but out of assumption. When someone appears to be struggling, people often interpret your silence as shame, your absence as inability to afford their lifestyle. They stopped inviting me to dinners I couldn't afford anyway, stopped suggesting trips I couldn't take, stopped including me in conversations about career advancement because they assumed I had nothing to contribute. But in the quiet hours before dawn, when the world was still sleeping off its certainty, I was building an empire they couldn't see. Every rejected social invitation was hours I could spend coding. Every night spent at home was money I could reinvest in my business. Every moment of their pity was fuel for the fire that burned in the space between who I appeared to be and who I was becoming. The sacrifice was everything. Not just money, not just time, but the comfortable fiction that I was the same person I had been before I decided to bet everything on myself. I was becoming someone new in the dark, someone they wouldn't recognize when the lights finally came. And by February, something had broken inside me, and I wasn't sure it could be repaired. The bank account that had slowly been growing was suddenly hemorrhaging money. A server crash that cost thousands to fix. A client who disappeared without paying. Unexpected tax bills that arrived like personal attacks. I sat in my car in the parking lot of the grocery store, staring at my phone screen showing a balance that had dropped back into the terrifying territory of not enough. The woman at the checkout counter had been kind when my card was declined. "It happens to everyone, honey," she said. But her smile was the kind reserved for people who couldn't afford their groceries. I left the store with only the essentials, my cheeks burning with the familiar heat of financial shame. That night, I called my sister. "Maybe it's time to get a real job," she said, her voice gentle but tired. "This entrepreneurship thing, maybe it's not for everyone. Maybe it's okay to admit it's not working." I hung up and sat in the dark of my apartment, surrounded by the evidence of my efforts. Printouts of business plans, legal documents for my LLC, notebooks filled with ideas and strategies and dreams that suddenly felt like elaborate delusions. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of my neighbor's television through the thin walls and the occasional car passing on the street below. "What if they're right?" I whispered to the empty room. The question hung in the air like smoke, impossible to ignore. What if I was just stubborn? What if I was wasting my life chasing something that would never materialize? What if all those whispered conversations at parties were just people trying to save me from myself? I opened my laptop and stared at the business dashboard, at the numbers that told the story of everything I'd built and everything I'd lost. The metrics were promising. User engagement was up, revenue was growing slowly but steadily. But the bank account told a different story. The gap between potential and reality felt like an ocean I was trying to cross with my bare hands. For the first time in months, I opened job search websites. Senior developer positions at established companies, with steady salaries and health, insurance, and the kind of predictability that suddenly felt like luxury. I could be making 6 figures within a month, could have my pride back, could stop being the cautionary tale in other people's conversations. My finger hovered over the apply button for a position at a Fortune 500 company. Good salary, great benefits. The kind of job that would make my mother proud and my sister relieved. The kind of job that would prove I was sensible, that I could adapt, that I wasn't the delusional dreamer everyone thought I'd become. But I couldn't click it. Even in my darkest moment, even when everything seemed to be crumbling, I couldn't surrender the part of me that knew, that had always known, that I was building something extraordinary, something that would prove every whispered doubt wrong. Closed the laptop and sat in the darkness, holding the space between giving up and holding on. The silence was different now. Not empty, but full of possibility, like the pause before thunder. March arrived like a secret whispered in the dark. The algorithm I had been perfecting for 18 months suddenly clicked into place, like a lock, finally finding its key. User acquisition exploded overnight. Not the slow, steady growth I had been hoping for, but the kind of exponential curve that makes you check the numbers 3 times because they seem impossible. I sat in my kitchen at 6 a.m., watching the metrics update in real time on my phone screen. New users, revenue spikes, engagement rates that made my heart race. The coffee grew cold in my hands as I refreshed the dashboard again and again, afraid that if I looked away, the numbers would disappear like a mirage. But they didn't disappear. They grew. The first major client signed on a Tuesday. A tech company that had been watching my platform for months, they said, waiting to see if it could scale. The contract was worth more than I had made in the previous 2 years combined. I read the email 4 times before it felt real, before I allowed myself to believe that the signature at the bottom meant what I thought it meant. I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. The success felt too fragile, too new, like something that might break if I spoke it out loud. Instead, I moved through my days carrying this secret like a small sun in my chest, warming me from the inside, while the world continued to see only the surface. The same clothes, the same car, the same woman they had written off months ago. The second client came a week later, then the third. Then a bidding war between 2 major corporations who wanted exclusive rights to my technology. I sat in my apartment, negotiating million-dollar deals over the phone while wearing pajama pants and fuzzy slippers. The contrast, so absurd it made me laugh out loud. The money came in waves, each deposit larger than the last. My bank account grew from hundreds to thousands to numbers that made me dizzy. But I kept living the same way, kept driving the same car, kept wearing the same clothes. Not out of fear, but out of something deeper. A need to fully inhabit this transformation before I showed it to the world. Late at night, I would walk through my apartment and touch things. The secondhand furniture, the thrift store dishes, the clothes that had carried me through the hardest months of my life. Thank you, I whispered to each item, to the life that had taught me what I was capable of when everything else was stripped away. The silence was different now, not empty, but full of potential. Not lonely, but pregnant with possibility. I was becoming someone new in the dark, someone who understood that true power comes not from what people can see, but from what they never saw coming. The call came on a Thursday morning in April, while I was debugging code and drinking coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. The voice on the other end was professional, excited, completely unaware that she was about to change everything. "Congratulations," she said, and for a moment I thought she was a client calling about a contract. "You're number 27 on this year's Forbes 30 Under 30 list for technology. The article goes live tomorrow morning." I set down my coffee cup with hands that had suddenly forgotten how to be steady. "I'm sorry, what?" "Forbes 30 Under 30. Your platform's growth trajectory and revenue numbers are remarkable. We've been tracking your company for months. The feature story will highlight your journey from startup to major player in the tech industry. Congratulations. You should be very proud." After I hung up, I sat in the silence of my apartment, staring at the phone like it might explain what had just happened. Forbes. A list I had dreamed about but never dared to expect. A recognition that would change everything, that would make my name visible in ways I wasn't sure I was ready for. I called my mother. "Mom," I said, and then stopped, not sure how to explain what I needed to tell her. "Honey, what's wrong? You sound strange." "Nothing's wrong. Everything's—" "Mom, I'm going to be on the Forbes list tomorrow. Forbes 30 Under 30. The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Then, "What? What are you talking about?" "The business, Mom. The thing I've been working on, it worked. It really worked." I could hear her crying before she spoke. "Oh, sweetheart. Oh my God. I'm so proud of you. I never doubted, well, maybe I doubted a little, but I never stopped believing in you." The article went live at 6 a.m. Eastern. By 6:15, my phone was buzzing with notifications I couldn't keep up with. Text messages, emails, LinkedIn requests, Twitter mentions. The phone rang constantly. Reporters, investors, friends I hadn't heard from in years, family members who suddenly remembered my number. Sarah called, the friend whose engagement party had been my lowest point. "I just saw the Forbes article," she said, her voice small. "I had no idea. I'm so sorry if we ever made you feel—" "It's okay," I said, and meant it. "You didn't know because I didn't tell you. I couldn't tell you. I had to build it in silence." The story spread like wildfire. Local news stations called for interviews. Business magazines wanted to feature my journey. Investors who had ignored my emails months ago were suddenly interested in meetings. The woman who had been invisible was suddenly the center of attention she had never asked for. But the strangest moment came that evening, when I walked into a coffee shop near my apartment, the same one where I used to sit for hours, nursing a single cup of coffee while I worked, because I couldn't afford to heat my apartment during the day. The barista, who had always been polite but distant, looked up when I walked in, and her eyes widened with recognition. "Oh my God, you're the Forbes woman. I read about you online. I can't believe you used to come in here every day. I never knew. You were building something so incredible." I ordered the same coffee I always ordered, paid with the same worn debit card, and sat in the same corner booth where I had written the first lines of code that would change everything. The coffee tasted the same, but everything else was different. I was different. Not because of the money or the recognition, but because I had finally become the person I had always known I could be. The weight of the moment settled on my shoulders, like a crown, heavy, beautiful, and earned through every silent morning, every declined invitation, every whispered doubt I had transformed into fuel for the fire that had been burning in me all along. Now I understand the cruel mathematics of success, how it can divide your life into before and after, how it can make you both visible and somehow more alone than you ever were in your invisibility. The Forbes list changed everything and nothing. The money in my bank account grew from hundreds to millions, but the woman who checks that balance every morning is still the same person who used to count quarters for groceries. The strangest part isn't the money or the recognition. It's watching people rewrite history. Suddenly, everyone remembers being supportive. The friends who stopped calling claim they were giving me space to work. The family members who suggested I get a real job now tell stories about how they always believed in my vision. The acquaintances who whispered about my thrift store dresses now want to know my secret to success. I've learned that being right doesn't taste the way you think it will. There's no sweetness in vindication, no satisfaction in watching people who dismissed you suddenly compete for your attention. Instead, there's a hollow quality to it all.